Welcome to the Kentucky Today podcast. I'm Lawrence Smith, the editor of Kentucky Today. Well, the Charlie Kirk assassination continues to be of great interest to Kentucky Baptists and to the wider evangelical world. The major event, of course, this past week was the memorial service on Sunday. Close to 100,000 people attended, plus millions more online. This is tough to verify, but it's said to be the largest gospel gathering in history. Said that as you said, that's hard to verify, but it certainly was a large gathering in which the gospel was clearly preached. I'm going to bring in Mark Maynard, the managing editor of Kentucky Today. And Mark, I didn't see the whole thing. You saw a larger chunk than I did. I've seen lots of excerpts and sound bites, of course. But you and I are old enough to remember the old Billy Graham crusades, and this kind of felt like that. Would you agree?
Oh, totally. I was thinking that today when I was thinking about, what I'd seen. And yeah, very reminiscent of that, just, gigantic crowds and, the gospel presented just in great force and in great length and in great numbers. And yeah, it was really very reminiscent of that. And anymore, we call them, even our funerals, we call them celebrations. We don't really call it anything other than that. And I know this was a memorial, but it was kind of a celebration too. Some of the great artists that came to sing before everything got started really set the worshipful tone, I think, for the whole day.
Well, I was curious, so I looked up, the largest Billy Graham crusade, and here's what I found. The largest one was in 1973 in Seoul, South Korea. 3.2 million people attended over the course of 5 days. Now, thanks to digital technology, the Kirk funeral probably reached more people, but it's amazing that the impact that this has had across the world, many people praying and hoping that it perhaps leads to a revival of some kind across the world. I was looking up the Billy Graham crusade, and it did lead to a Christian revival in South Korea. What were your thoughts there?
Yeah, I can remember some of those revivals he did, overseas and with huge numbers, and similar to this. And I think about this one too, and really his were like this as well. There was no craziness going on. I mean, it was people showing up, sitting down and listening. I know it was tough to get in there probably, with that many people, there were tickets and that kind of thing. You just kind of came if you wanted to come, and they filled that arena. Just practically every seat in that place, maybe every seat was taken. And there was some that was spillover.
Yeah, there was overflow outside.
Yeah, there was even more there than could even get in. And from just the people that I've heard of or read about who went to that thing, they were just in awe and really inspired by what happened at that. And I think, the great speakers all day long, and probably none more powerful than his widow.
You're right. I want to get to that in a second. What really stunned me, and I've covered politics for many, many years, was the number of political leaders, members of Trump's cabinet, who gave clear gospel presentation, or gave a clear gospel witness. Marco Rubio, phenomenal. Pete Hegseth. And the vice president said that he's spoken more about Jesus the past 2 weeks since Kirk's assassination than he had for his entire public career. So it was really startling to see the clear gospel presentation from so many political leaders.
What has struck me too is, and I was in this camp. I knew who Charlie Kirk was. I really hadn't listened to him that much. I'd read some things on Twitter, that kind of thing, X, I guess. I'd read some things on there about him and what some of the things he'd said. But after he was killed, then you start seeing things, and now we're seeing him. Anytime you turn around on social media, there's something about him, and wow, you find out what a powerful presentation he makes for the gospel, really. Not just politics. I know he was a politician too to some degree, but you're really seeing that side of him, the Jesus side of him, and that was really powerful to see. And I love how people have really reacted to that and have kind of rallied around that. And who knows where this will go? I don't think it's been a couple of weeks now since he was assassinated, 3 even, and that's a long time. Usually, news moves on, right? It's that's the way the news is, but the news really hasn't moved past him at this point in any camp.
You mentioned Erica Kirk's speech, and it was notable in many ways, primarily through which she communicated that she forgave the man who shot her husband. That was powerful, and it seemed to touch even people who were not necessarily fans of Charlie Kirk. But there was a lesson there for all of us about forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the most powerful gospel responses of all, right? How we're supposed to forgive. How if we weren't forgiven, where would we be? So that really when I was watching when she said that, and whoa, that shook that place. It really did. And I mean, they were cheering and crying with her or whatever, but. And that couldn't have been easy to do, especially with how everything happened and all that. And I don't think it was a show either. Some people may think, oh, she just said that to make herself look good or whatever. I think it's very genuine, and that would be a tough thing to do. I'm not going to lie. If that had happened to my spouse, I'm not sure I would be so quick to forgive. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right. Usually when a prominent leader passes away, and it seems like Kirk has gained even more prominence since his death, but when a prominent political leader passes away, there's a memorial service, but they're often very generic, very kind of civic in nature.
Yeah.
But on his podcast, Southern Seminary President Albert Mohler talked about how this service was different. This was more, he says, than just a civic observance. Listen to what he said.
There will be those who will try to say what you saw yesterday in Phoenix was just 5 hours of civil religion. I raised that because I know it's going to be said. But I think in this case, even though civil religion was certainly there, red, white, and blue, the banners, the fireworks, and all the rest, the reality is it was far more than civil religion. Because here's the thing, civil religion, when it comes to doctrine, is absolutely minimalistic and seeks at every point not to be offensive. That is to say, civil religion, in terms of its essence, is entirely inclusive. That's not exactly what happened yesterday. As a matter of fact, that's not what happened at all. Specific Christian doctrines were affirmed. The gospel of Jesus Christ was affirmed in its specificity. This was not just some kind of religious event. It was an explicitly Christian event. It was a Christian event that pointed to the gospel and, at more than one point, invited those who attended and those who were hearing and observing to come to Christ in terms of their own personal faith and affirmation.
That's Dr. Albert Mohler of Southern Seminary on his excellent broadcast, the briefing. Mark, I want to wrap this up, but first I want to discuss briefly the media coverage of the Kirk Memorial Service, specifically the Associated Press. AP is very important because it feeds its stories to so many subscribing news outlets, and they kind of set the narrative. It was disappointing because in their story, their initial story, it was all about the politics. They totally left out, although this service was infused with gospel, AP left out the gospel essence of it.
They did, and that was bothersome. I remember they had several takes through the day, of course, as it was unfolding. They were writing, as the day was going on. But, as the day went on with that, there were gospel presentations almost, every half hour or more than that. Almost everybody that got up there had something to say about it. And if it had just been one person or two that had really said something, maybe you get away with not saying a whole lot about it. But to me, the essence of the whole thing was about the gospel. The essence of the whole ceremony was about the gospel, and they missed that or refused. I don't. They didn't miss it. They were there. They just refused to talk about that as they are wont to do. I mean, that's their prerogative, I guess. But we didn't feel that was well represented enough, and we actually put an editor's note on the story saying that was missing from the story. It was an AP story, and we're sorry about that. But and we came back the next day with a story talking about the gospel presentations of many of the people who spoke, because as Christians and as Baptists, as our beliefs, we wanted people to see that part of it. That was the most important thing, to see the gospel being presented by a lot of powerful people, as you stated earlier, and to see them do that was it was uplifting. I know we interviewed one young lady from Winchester, who was there with her husband and her dad, and that's what she says, very emotional and very uplifting. The whole thing, the whole 5 hours, and 5 hours is a long time to sit and watch, but she was glad she was there, and I'm sure anybody that was there, they're not going to forget that. And I thought it was interesting. One thing she said, Lawrence, was that she wanted to be able to tell her kids and grandkids about that. And this may be one of those occasions. This may be one of those things. You hear people talking about the Billy Graham Crusades. I was at the one in Louisville, or I was at the one in wherever, and you still hear them talk about that because it was a big event. This was a big event. I hate to call a memorial an event, but that's what it was, really.
Yeah, and to put a bow on the coverage, AP's coverage of it, just so our readers know, one of our biggest tasks day to day is editing AP, to kind of minimize some of the bias that's in those stories. People ought to realize that, people want unbiased journalism, but there's no such thing as unbiased journalism because there's no such thing as an unbiased person. What we want is fairness in coverage, and sometimes, unfortunately, APs fall short in that area. So just so our readers know that's one of our big jobs, is to kind of monitor AP and its coverage. We don't always succeed, but we try to make those stories as unbiased as we can.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a big task, honestly, because you have to go over every story with a fine tooth comb, and that sometimes the clock always beats you. You can't beat the clock. So I have found that out to be true. But probably the most criticism we receive is from AP stories, from people saying they didn't like this or that in that AP story, and that's biased and all that. But we're all biased to some degree.
Yeah, and we get those and we hear them, and we do try our best
That's right.
to minimize the apparent biases in these stories. We'll move on, Mark, to something else, a story that our life issues reporter Tessa Redmond did actually a couple of weeks ago, but it was kind of lost in the Charlie Kirk story, but I want people to pay attention to it. Kentucky pregnancy centers are pushing back on some ads that appeared in Kentucky gas stations, advertising the abortion pill. And I talked to Tessa about that story. So here's our conversation about that story she did on the abortion ads at Kentucky gas stations. Tessa, first of all, if you would tell us the story behind the story here. How did you first hear about this company called Mayday Health placing signs at gas stations, essentially advertising the abortion pill, mifepristone?
Yes, so I first heard about this story. It was broken by a news organization in West Virginia. Actually, Kentucky's not the only place where these ads were placed. It was also at West Virginia gas stations, and I signed up for basically like a social media monitoring service called TalkWalker. And so you can input keywords, and then it gives you a daily digest of things that are going on. And so that's part of how I look for leads with what's going on in Kentucky. And so it popped up through that. And then I also heard about it through a press conference, and was just interested of the fact that, Kentucky is a state where abortion is not legal. And yet a company was placing ads about if you are pregnant and don't want to be pregnant, to go to a website to get information about what to do about that. So I just started seeking out some information from there.
That's my next question. So the signs didn't say mifepristone, but they directed people to a website. What did those signs say?
Yes, so the sign said pregnant, don't want to be, and it said learn more at mayday.health. So Mayday Health is, they market themselves as a reproductive education nonprofit. And so they were founded after Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court in 2022. And they spread awareness about abortion pills, morning after pills, also known as Plan B, birth control, and so-called gender affirming healthcare.
So this is a pro-abortion organization.
Yes.
You started digging into this, and how did you finally make some headway in this? As I know that you were digging into this, but really couldn't find much information. What finally broke it for you?
Yeah, so I had reached out to a lot of my pregnancy center contacts first of all to see what they were seeing in their communities. And what I found was none of them were aware that this was happening. So I reached out directly to Mayday Health, their media contact, and they very graciously shared the information that I was seeking.
So they weren't hiding it.
No, no.
You reached out to the pregnancy resource centers. How are they responding to this once you told them this was going on?
Yeah, there was a lot of grief. They were very bothered. I heard words like frustrated, angry, saddened. Um, these pregnancy centers in these communities where these ads were placed, they exist to support women who are walking through unplanned or unwanted pregnancies, to walk with them through that, to give them resources like material help, diapers and wipes, formula, clothing, things like that, parenting education. And they were really bothered that these ads were present. In the words of one pregnancy director I spoke with, she was like, it's not as simple as not wanting to be pregnant. And so when these ministries exist to serve women who might see these ads, they were very bothered and unsettled by that. They were also concerned that these ads were present and they really didn't know about it. These are their communities, right? And they had no idea that these ads were there. They were also grateful to know about it, to raise awareness. But some expressed concern about women in their community seeing the ads and then seeking out abortion pills without really being able to touch base with a doctor or connect with community support.
I know in some cases, um, the chemical abortion can be reversed. Um, were any of the pregnancy centers prepared to take that action? Do you know how many are equipped to do that?
Yes, so there are currently 13 providers of abortion pill reversal in the state of Kentucky, and my understanding is that can refer to either clinics or pregnancy centers where that's supported or the actual medical providers who prescribe that regimen. So there are a couple of pregnancy centers whose medical directors will prescribe progesterone. So the way the mifepristone pill works is that it blocks the basically the effect of the progesterone hormone, which is progestation. It's the pregnancy support hormone. And so medical providers, they will prescribe daily progesterone doses through the end of the first trimester at least, to try and help outcompete the effects of the mifepristone medication. And so what those pregnancy centers can do when women come in, if they provide that service, they can contact their medical director, and then that woman can have an ultrasound at that pregnancy center. And Dr. Jonathan Abbott, who's an OBGYN in Hopkinsville that I interviewed for this story, he said one of the things he loves about working with pregnancy centers in the realm of abortion pill reversal treatment is that when he has those pregnancy centers and the qualified um, medical professionals who are there, the registered nurses who are qualified to provide limited obstetric ultrasounds, when they perform those ultrasounds, those women aren't charged for it. Whereas if women go to his clinic, he doesn't have any control over billing, and so they can be billed for those things. So there are pregnancy centers who are equipped through their relationship with their medical directors to provide that to women, and then to walk through it with them as they're coming back for ultrasounds that are then reviewed by their medical director to see if the pregnancy is continuing as it should, or if that baby has passed away as a result of the mifepristone.
So this has got to be done, as far as you know, fairly quickly after the abortion pill is taken.
It does, yes. Dr. Abbott said that really what's key is that the progesterone is taken within 24 hours of the mifepristone pill. He said when women are able to get that help quickly. He said he sees up to 75%, around 75% of those pregnancies continue. But the longer a woman waits, the longer that mifepristone has an opportunity to stop the effects of the progesterone and allowing that fetus to continue to develop.
I know that using mifepristone for abortions technically is illegal in Kentucky, but
Mhm.
it's hard to enforce, obviously, because they're done in private. You reached out to the Attorney General's office about these ads. What did the Attorney General's office tell you?
Yes, they spokesman for his office said that they were aware of the ads and they were reviewing the matter, but there's no word yet on if they're going to be taking any action.
Yeah, I guess it's difficult to know whether actually advertising for them is illegal.
Mhm.
I guess they're making that determination.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I will say the founder of Mayday Health, Liv Reisner, had previously said that the organization wasn't really concerned about promoting their website as a resource for how to access abortion pills because it's First Amendment protected speech, and the government can't interfere with that. So, as an organization, they don't seem to be concerned about placing the ads in Kentucky.
hmm. Do state lawmakers plan to address this issue? I know you talked to Nancy Tate, Representative Nancy Tate, who is kind of the, uh, if not the head, at least a big part of the pro-life caucus in the legislature.
Mhm. I've not heard any word if lawmakers plan to address the advertising around accessing abortion pills. I did hear from Representative Tate that it was her intention to address abortion pills coming into the state during the next session, so we very well may see that.
You write regularly as well about the number of abortions in Kentucky. So let's tie in that to this. You recently said that the Cabinet for Health and Family Services reported zero abortions in Kentucky between, I think, April and June. That's good news, but that report does not really include chemical abortion, the use of mifepristone, because that's done in private. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So, currently under Kentucky law, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, their vital statistics branch, is supposed to receive a report of any abortion that's performed by the physician, by the hospital, or the clinic where that took place within 3 days of the end of the month in which that abortion occurred. And as our listeners may be aware, abortion is currently illegal in Kentucky. Elective abortion is legal in Kentucky unless the life of the mother is at risk or damage to one of her life-sustaining organs. So some of the things that we've seen reported to the cabinet ever since Roe v. Wade fell and Kentucky's trigger abortion ban went in place is things like ectopic pregnancy removal, for example, or even instances of hysterectomy, emergency surgery addressing intense bleeding, things like that. So we haven't seen any of those things reported in between, April, May, or June of this year.
You may or may not know this, but say a woman takes the chemical abortion pills, mifepristone, and there are complications, and she shows up at the emergency room, whether with some kind of complication. How is that handled? Is that reported somehow?
I'm not sure that it's reported somehow. What I do know, just in my conversation, in particular with Dr. Jonathan Abbott that I mentioned earlier, you know, his anecdotal experience with women that he has treated who have had chemical abortions is that when they receive these pills, they're told to go into if they have complications and they need to go into the ER to seek help, to say that they're having a miscarriage instead of that they've taken mifepristone or misoprostol, which is the second step of a chemical abortion. And he said, what that does is it prevents a doctor's ability to provide appropriate care on the back end after these pills have been provided. So, to my knowledge, that would not be reported. It seems that an abortion that's induced by medication would look very similar to a miscarriage.
Mhm. Tessa, great job tracking down that story and checking with all your resources and letting Kentuckians know what's going on out there in the area of abortion, which is still, even after the Dobbs decision, a big story in Kentucky. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
That's Tessa Redmond, our life issues reporter. And Mark, she's working on a follow-up story on that. And she did a story today, in fact, about a Lexington church dedicating a memorial to unborn children. 63 stones placed at Boone's Creek Baptist Church, representing 63 million lives lost to abortion. She does a great job, and you're not going to see covers like that anyplace else in the state.
No, absolutely. Tessa's on top of it, very intelligent and really stays on all the issues. And, the chemical abortion, of course, that's a huge issue out there, and it's kind of uncontrollable. It shouldn't be. It's illegal, but like you say, where they're kind of doing it behind closed doors, so to speak, and we really need to get a better handle on that if we can in some way, because I know we report 0 abortions, and that's great. Like you say, that is tremendous, but that's not how the abortions are getting done now. And that's just the next step, I guess, the next fight that Kentucky Baptists and others are going to be fighting as far as the abortion issue goes.
Yes, we'll certainly see what action may be taken on the state and federal level. And whenever it happens, Tessa will, of course, be right on top of it. She does a great job.
Yeah.
We have a couple of minutes left, but I want to talk about another story that we did this week, and that is a good story, an increasing number of volunteers for Kentucky Baptist disaster relief. Ron Crow and his team are doing a great job there.
They are, and I had one in Bowling Green, I think this past week or week and a half ago, and had like 400 plus first-time volunteers. And this year alone, I think he said there was 860 first-time volunteers. So that just makes the Golden Army that much bigger, and he has really got an army of people at his disposal. And those people, they're very much family. And in fact, Chip wrote the story last week, and I wrote the headline. I said "A Growing Family," because that's what they are. They feel that way about each other. They work together. They eat together. They're together a couple of weeks, and roughing it really is what it amounts to when you're sleeping on a gym floor that maybe doesn't have air conditioning, and you're next to your buddy or whatever. That's roughing it, if you ask me. My roughing it's a day without the remote, but their roughing it's a little more than that. But Ron has great people that he works for, or works for him, volunteers for him, and really volunteer for Jesus if you really want to get right down to it.
Yeah, and they go to address physical needs, but their main purpose is to also address spiritual needs, which are many in these disaster-prone or disaster-struck areas.
I'll tease a story we got coming this weekend. It's disaster relief related, about a church that hasn't been a church for a couple of years in the southeast Kentucky, around Bell County, that is coming back to life, and it's been a great partnership between Kentucky and some Tennessee people too. So and of course Kentucky's right there, helping like they always do. So it's a good story. So you all look forward to that. That'll be in Sunday.
Look forward to seeing that cooperative program in action.
That's exactly right.
As we wrap up, I want to make a quick mention of the loss of a couple of longtime public servants here in Jefferson County. We got word today as we record this on the death of Jefferson County Sheriff John Aubrey, who served for many, many years as sheriff, and that comes to the heels of the death of Jefferson County Clerk Bobby Holzclaw, who was buried this past week. So 2 longtime public servants leave big shoes to fill here in Jefferson County. Mm-hmm. We can read all those stories and more on KentuckyToday.com. And while you're there, sign up for our daily email, the morning briefing. And also, if you want to take a look at what's going on in the wider Kentucky Baptist Convention and the cooperative program that makes that possible, this podcast possible, go to kybaptist.org. That's it for now. Lord willing, we'll see you next time on the Kentucky Today podcast.